Great pieces, doing great work. Thank you for.
Good evening, Chris. Thanks, my friend. Appreciate it. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. It was not the first Trump administration scandal. It was certainly not the last. But in terms of permanent damage done to humans, in terms of the severity of the damage deliberately done to humans, the Trump administration, no matter what else they do, they will never, ever get out from the shadow of the fact that they really did, as a policy and a deliberate practice, they really did take little kids away from their moms and dads. It will never not be true that we all lived in a time when the White House ordered the forcible, systematic removal of children from their parents at the border. They outfitted the kids with little Mylar blankets and a lump of padding that was supposed to qualify as a mattress. And they told them to sleep on the floor behind chain link fence, alone, in federal detention without their moms and dads. Thousands of kids taken from their parents by the U.S. government, with the U.S. government having no plan in place on how or when to get those kids back to their parents. When we realized that our government was doing this, when we realized that the Trump administration had ordered this, there was a deafening roar of public outcry. And the Trump administration eventually stopped the child separation policy. Well, at least they said they stopped it. Since the Trump administration announced that supposed end to the child separation policy, more than 1,000 more kids have been taken away from their parents at the southern border and put into U.S. government custody, separate and apart from their parents. Child separations are still happening. They're just happening in the shadows now, without the administration admitting that this is still their policy. No matter what else happens in this administration, whether this administration lasts 4 more months or 4 more years, history will always remember this, right? This is a foundational moral catastrophe that will stand alone in the history books, even alongside the COVID catastrophe, even alongside all of the other things that have happened over these 3.5 disastrous years. But even though that decision to take kids away from their parents deliberately, even though that decision to do something systematically that none of us on our worst day could ever imagine doing personally on a human level to a young child, right? You can't imagine yourself ever being dark enough, right? Ever having an evil enough impulse to take a living kid away from their parent who was trying to hold on to them, to separate them indefinitely with no way to get them back. You can't even imagine that in yourself. No matter whatever else you've done in your life, you couldn't do it. But our government ordered it, and they did it systematically. And that will never, ever be alongside anything else they've done. But even still, with that standing alone, there have been weird, almost perverse offshoots of that story in terms of the behavior of the Trump administration and its appointees. Now, one of them we covered pretty extensively on this show when it first came to light. It was about a specific Trump appointee, an anti-abortion activist named Scott Lloyd, who was put in charge of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Scott Lloyd had been a lifelong anti-abortion activist. That's all he'd ever done in life. He was therefore an odd choice to lead the Office of Refugee Resettlement. For one thing, he had precisely 0 prior experience of anything having to do with resettling refugees, so why should he run the Refugee Resettlement Office? For unexplained reasons, they gave him the job anyway, and once he was installed there in 2017, Mr. Lloyd decided that he would use the power of his office, the fact that people in custody under his authority were essentially under his control. He would use that power to block a teenage rape victim who was living alone in a shelter run by Scott Lloyd's office. He tried to use the fact that that gave him power over her to block her from obtaining abortion, because she wanted to get an abortion so she would not be forced to bear the child of her rapist. He decided he would block that. Now, in this country, it does not matter if you are a refugee. It doesn't matter if you are not American by birth. It doesn't matter if you are here as a legal immigrant or otherwise. Under our Constitution, everybody is guaranteed a constitutional right to obtain an abortion if they want one. And in the case of this 17-year-old girl who had been raped, she wanted one. But this Trump appointee, Scott Lloyd, Who knows why he was in this job in the first place? He decided he would use his power to block this girl from getting it. Right? He's the guy in charge of this agency that has all these kids living in its custody. He decided he would use that power to take it upon himself to block any young woman under his purview from getting an abortion for any reason, starting with that 17-year-old girl who had been raped. And in the end, that 17-year-old girl sued. And she won. And she was able to get the abortion. And the lawsuit around her case turned up something else about the way the Trump administration was running this operation, and this guy, Scott Lloyd, they had put in charge of all these young people. The New York Times was first to break the news that Scott Lloyd had instructed his staff at the Office of Refugee Resettlement that they should give him a spreadsheet every week listing, one by one, individually, girls who were in the custody of his agency who were pregnant. That spreadsheet eventually became public thanks to a FOIA request. And when it became public, it was revealed to all of us that not only was Scott Lloyd keeping tabs on every pregnant young woman in his agency's custody, he was tracking all the girls' menstrual cycles as well. I should tell you, he was tracking these girls' periods after a court told him that he needed to stop interfering in these girls' medical care decisions. Even after that court order telling him to get out of these decisions, to get out of the middle of this, he kept tracking their periods anyway, individually, girl by girl, month by month, because that's what he was into. And I know this is dark stuff. I mean, it was rough reporting all of this, frankly, the first time around. It's one of those things that, like, you come to work and hope there's no new developments on that story. But the reason I'm bringing it all up again tonight is because now we have arrived at the next chapter in this same story. And I'm not going to dance around it. I'm just going to say it. And I guess we should have seen it coming, but still, it's a shock. A nurse who works at an ICE detention facility in Georgia has just contributed to a whistleblower complaint. She says that in her time working at this ICE detention facility, it's a detention center in Irwin County, Georgia, she says that immigrant women at that facility have told her they have routinely been sent to a gynecologist who has performed unnecessary procedures on them, including hysterectomies. Just to underscore that, the allegation here is that this is a federal facility and they have been sending immigrant women in their care, in their custody, to a doctor who has removed their reproductive organs for no medical reason and without them consenting to it. Let me read you some of the passages from the complaint here, which was written on behalf of that nurse, as well as some of the women detainees. It was written by an advocacy group called Project South. I will tell you in advance, although you can probably see it coming, that it's a little bit upsetting. All right, from the complaint. Quote, a detained immigrant told Project South that she talked to 5 different women detained at the Irwin County Detention Center between October and December 2019. 5 different women between October, November, and December 2019, over that 3-month period. 5 different women who'd had a hysterectomy done. When she talked to them about the surgery, the women, quote, reacted confused when explaining why they had one done. The detainee said, quote, when I met all these women who'd had the surgeries, I thought this was like an experimental concentration camp. It was like they're experimenting with our bodies. The nurse who contributed to this whistleblower complaint explains it like this, quote, everybody this doctor sees has a hysterectomy, just about everybody. He's even taken out the wrong ovary on one detained immigrant woman. She was supposed to get her left ovary removed because it had a cyst on the left ovary. He took out the right one. She was upset. She had to go back to take out the left, and she wound up with a total hysterectomy. She still wanted children. So she has to go back home now and tell her husband that she can't bear kids. She said she was not all the way out under anesthesia and heard the doctor tell the nurse that he took out the wrong ovary. The nurse says she and her fellow nurses, quote, questioned among ourselves, like, goodness, he's taking everybody's stuff out. That's his specialty. He's the uterus collector. She says, quote, I know that's ugly. Is he collecting these things or something? Everybody he sees, he's taking all their uteruses out or he's taking their tubes out. What in the world? According to this nurse, this whistleblower, she alleges in this complaint that on several occasions, women told her that this doctor performed hysterectomies. He removed the uteruses of these refugee women for no medical reason without their proper informed consent.
And this nurse, the whistleblower, talked about it today with my colleague, Jacob Soboroff. Watch.
The ladies would put in to see the gynecologist for whatever reason that they were wanting to be seen for, and they were having hysterectomies. They would come back oftentimes and question, why did I have to have a hysterectomy? I didn't have an answer.
They would ask you directly.
Why did I have to have a hysterectomy? Nobody explained this to me. I didn't know I was undergoing this. I had one lady to tell me that she was a young girl. If she had known that she was going to have a hysterectomy, she wouldn't have went.
You're quoting the complaint as saying that's his specialty. He's the uterus collector. Is that how people refer to this doctor?
That's how the detainees referred to this physician. They referred to him as, I had a detainee to ask me, she said, well, what is he doing, Miss Wooten, collecting all of our uteruses? And I just looked at her puzzled because I didn't have an answer.
I almost don't know what to say hearing you describe this as a nurse giving care to these inmates. How do you process this? What is this like?
You're in awe because you don't have a valid answer for them. It's mind blowing and it's mind boggling. When you get in your vehicle after a 12-hour shift and you cry yourself home and you're the only one in the vehicle asking why, what is going on, what is happening, I don't have an answer. Why is nobody not hearing them or taking them, so to speak, seriously? I don't have an answer. So shift after shift, then it gets to be to where you don't want to report to work because you don't have an answer. You don't have a reason, and they're going to ask you why.
What happened to the women that you spoke with who had these hysterectomies? Do you know?
A lot of them were deported back to their countries. I don't know if they were transferred others to other facilities.
Do you think what happened to the women that you spoke with is going to happen to other women in the future?
Me personally, if there's not a change, there's not going to be a change. If there's not any correction, there's not going to be any correction. If there are not people like myself that are brave enough to have a voice for other people and not be so afraid to speak out, a lot of people desire to speak out, but afraid of losing their job. I spoke out, I was demoted. So I was made the example of. I whistle blew because I love to do what I love to do. And if it was my son or my daughter, my mother or my father that was in that situation, then I would want somebody to speak out on their behalf as well.
You obviously know the detainees well inside Irwin. What would be your message to them today?
My message to the detainees today would be all hope is not lost. That things last for only a short while. But there is a beacon light. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I apologize on behalf of Irwin County Detention Center for what goes on concerning them in the facility. And I understand totally, not in that situation, but I understand totally what it feels like to be overlooked and neglected. Just not neglected in silence.
I should tell you that these allegations from this whistleblower are not isolated complaints. NBC News has spoken to 4 different lawyers who represent women who were detained in that federal facility in Georgia who are making similar claims. According to NBC's reporting, one of the lawyers represents 2 women who were detained at the facility who say they received hysterectomies that they believe may have been unnecessary. Another lawyer represents a woman who says she went to this doctor's office for an exam. The exam left her with bruising. An attorney for the doctor against whom these allegations have been made says his client, quote, vigorously denies these allegations and will be cleared of any wrongdoing when the facts come out. For its part, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, refused to comment on the allegations from those lawyers who spoke to NBC News, but they have released a statement tonight in response to the allegations in the whistleblower complaint. It says, in part, these accusations will be fully investigated by an independent office. However, ICE vehemently disputes the implication that detainees are used for experimental medical procedures. The health, welfare, and safety of ICE detainees is one of the agency's highest priorities. Any assertion or claim to the contrary is false and intentionally misleading. The statement goes on to say, quote, according to ICE data, since 2018, only 2 individuals at Irwin County Detention Center were referred to certified credentialed medical professionals at gynecological and obstetrical healthcare facilities for hysterectomies. Whether or not the women were referred for hysterectomies or not, more than 2 women are saying they got them, and more than 2 women are telling lawyers as part of this complaint that they don't know why they got them and that they don't think they needed them. Joining us now is Jacob Soboroff, MSNBC correspondent and the author, of course, of Separated: Inside an American Tragedy, which is the seminal book on the child separation policy that I think is relevant context here. Jacob, thanks for making time to talk about this reporting that you've done today. I know it's been a really busy day.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me here.
So you had this remarkable interview with this whistleblower, this nurse who has worked at this facility in Georgia. Chris Hayes was also able to talk with her live along with her lawyer in the last hour. But to be clear, as compelling as her story is, her first-person story is, the allegations aren't coming solely from her, right? There are things that other people and that other lawyers for other people have declared as part of this complaint that would seem to back up what she's saying.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. For us, it was important to corroborate the allegations in this whistleblower complaint from Ms. Wooten. I wanted to speak with her myself, which obviously I did, but also to corroborate the allegations of the migrants who were detailed in the whistleblower complaint. So Julia and I spoke to 4 different lawyers today, and every one of them has said that they had a client who had contact with this doctor where they were told one thing, and ultimately they came out of this either having a procedure or being recommended to have a procedure that was deeply invasive, and of course, at least in 2 of those cases, the hysterectomies took place. And one of those lawyers even told us they went to the detention facility, complained about the treatment from this doctor, but no change was ever made.
And to be clear, the complaints here from these women and their lawyers who are speaking on their behalf is essentially that not that they never should have been sent out to see a gynecologist, but rather that whatever was going on with them, they did not understand that the treatment was going to be a hysterectomy. And then in some cases, the allegation here is that the hysterectomies, whether or not the women consented to them in the first place, they were not medically necessary.
No, that's right. And there are other allegations of other procedures, including pap smears, where women were told, you've got ovarian cysts or you've got ovarian cancer. And that turned out not to be the case, but those procedures happened anyway. And I do want to say, Rachel, at the time we published the article, we went to the facility itself, LaSalle Corrections Corporation, which owns and operates the Irwin facility, for ICE, and they didn't have anything to say to us, but we did get a comment before we came to air, and I'd like to read that to you if that's okay as well.
Please, yeah.
They wanted us to let everyone know that they say they adhere to performance-based standards, and LaSalle Corrections has a strict zero-tolerance policy for any kind of inappropriate behavior in our facilities and takes allegations of such mistreatment seriously. Our company strongly refutes these allegations and any implications of misconduct at the ICDC. But, that goes against what we heard from at least one of the attorneys today, which was when these allegations came up from their clients, she went to the correctional facility, she told them she didn't want her patients seeing that doctor, and patients continued to see that doctor, as Ms. Wooten details very graphically. And then I think, this statement that they considered him the uterus collector is graphic, it's hard to listen to, but that's what they're talking about, according to Ms. Wooten inside this facility, and she's not the only one saying so.
Jacob, what should happen here legally in terms of this complaint? Obviously, she's casting herself as a whistleblower. There is significant corroboration for the worst of the allegations that she's making. ICE is saying that this will be investigated. The facility is saying that whether or not it's investigated, they deny that any of this happened. The doctor is saying essentially the same thing. What do you expect to happen in terms of this being looked into in terms of these women's claims being investigated and potentially there being accountability here?
So the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security will open an investigation. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties within the Department of Homeland Security will look at this as well, and they were copied essentially on the complaint. And what I think that this gets to, one of the lawyers said to me, which I really want to underscore here, is that while she didn't think that this is a conspiracy, a large conspiracy by the government necessarily to have these procedures on these women, it is emblematic of systematic lack of oversight for medical care and also just well-being and welfare of immigrants in immigration detention, as well as, you mentioned ORR and what happened with Scott Lloyd. With family separations, we didn't know what was happening because we couldn't see inside these facilities. And immigration lawyers have stressed to me over and over again today that this particular example is uniquely heinous if the allegations ultimately are proven to be true. But it's one of many examples in this system which precede, frankly, this administration, where immigration detention is a place where people come to seek refuge, seek asylum, but are subjected to prison-like conditions where they have virtually no recourse when something like this happens, or at least that's the way that they feel. Obviously, the government would say differently, and of course, their lawyers would disagree.
Yeah, prison-like conditions and worse. I mean, I know there's a reason that ICE put their denial in the terms immediately about whether this is human experimentation on these essentially powerless detainees and refugees. I understand why they went right at that because of the way that resonates with all of us who know any history here. But the fact that this is part of the government where we're training people who are working, even at a remove, working for the U.S. government to treat human beings the way that immigrants and refugees have been treated, it's just, I mean, it's on all of us in terms of what the government is saying we stand for and what they'll do in our name.
There's no doubt about it, Rachel. That's why it's important that we talk about these stories. I know these are hard stories to talk about, but these are real human beings undergoing what is alleged to be truly, truly horrific treatment at the hands of a so-called medical professional. And that's why now you have the Department of Homeland Security will be forced to investigate this. And we've heard the top officials in Congress on the Hill also call for investigations as well. And so now that has to play its course.
MSNBC correspondent Jacob Soboroff. Jacob, thank you so much for your reporting on this and helping us put it in context. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, much more to get to in the news tonight. Stay with us.